We continue the analysis on today's inauguration and President Tinubu's inaugural speech as we turn to a policy analyst and social commentator, Seun Awogbenle. Seun, it's so good to have you here today. So,
pleasure.
You listened to the speech of the new president of Nigeria, the 16th president, some people will say, and he's said a number of things, including the fact that he will focus on security, he will make sure that he brings everybody together, implying that we're stronger together. But the big news of the day is the fact that he said, it's gone, and that is the subsidy that a lot of people were wondering whether the former President Buhari will take off, but he didn't. So what's your thoughts about it? Because the moment that happened, a number of people were like, yes, but no. What's the detail? The devil is in the detail. What's your thought?
Well, first I'm going to start with the speech of the president. That's the inaugural speech. I listened with very keen attention. I think the speech was statesmanly, and I think it was quite pacific. He, in fact, actually said his political coloration ends today. And I think that's what you want to hear from a president. I read a few columns today with specific regard to that of Mr. Waziri Adio, who said the country is in need of national healing. And I think that perhaps that process may have started by no longer seeing people as either APC, PDP, or Labour Party. We are all Nigerians, and in fact he said that. So I give him a lot of respect for that. In fact, myself, I was also expecting him to actually make pronouncements on a number of quick fixes, especially on the economy, which is the big elephant in the room. And I think he tried to do that, especially one, he abolished what you call the multiple exchange rate. He made emphasis to the arbitrage environment that's been created by that multiple exchange rate. He also said there's actually a need for that's Central Bank of Nigeria, the Monetary Policy Authority, to lower interest rate. And lastly, he was also clear about the fact that by legislation, the subsidy has been outlawed. So by June 1, there's no provision for subsidy. So a provision that we had is just for the first 6 months, and by next month, I'm sure that there will no longer be subsidy. But there are quite a number of areas when you say that. I mean, I give him a lot of respect for that. I was expecting that. I feel it's one of the quick fixes that we have. But again, before you remove subsidy, you then begin to talk about, what are the palliatives? What impact is it going to have on food inflation, which drives headline inflation? And then how do people react to it? And I can tell you that I'm sure there will be what you likely describe as panic buying. People will begin to, buy, and store and warehouse exactly because of uncertainty of what the next 2 months would. And again, perhaps before the Dangote refinery will come into full stream. So, but again, there was no contention on whether or not subsidy should go. Subsidy had to and must go. Last year, for example, we spent over 4 trillion naira. That's beyond $9 billion on fuel subsidy alone. When you spend that kind of money on fuel subsidy, and then you have to essentially borrow to actually meet basic provisions, especially that of education, meeting health. Okay, I give you an example. In the 2023 budget, for example, the budget for education is barely above 1 trillion. Same for health, right? Which are important human capital component. But we're spending an average of 560 billion naira on fuel subsidy every month. So it makes no economic common sense.
Let me just stop you very quickly so that we can take this chunk by chunk.
Absolutely.
Now, let's look at this fuel subsidy, for example. If the president is saying that it's gone,
yeah.
What does that mean in economic terms? Because what the previous government was trying to do was get $800 million that would serve as palliative, that would help in one way or the other. Their policy direction in terms of how to spend that $800 million was not clear because it was being criticized that you can't distribute 800 million naira to dollars to everybody. What do you think? Or what would you like to see the new president do over the next 48 hours to show that he means what he has said with regards fuel subsidy is gone and how he's going to manage it so that there's not going to be that level of desperation that we know can happen in Nigeria?
So I think the first thing is that I would like to actually commend his honesty. Don't forget that for a very long time under President Muhammadu Buhari's administration, we had a new coinage that was described as under recovery. For a long time, they didn't want to admit that there was still subsidy, right? Up until, quite into the sunset of the administration. So I think I like the fact that he actually admitted that subsidy remains a big elephant in the room, and there was no missing of what about it. Now, what does it mean? Saying it is gone is not enough. There are obvious implications, especially on one, again, declining or what's it called? Minimum wage is barely 30,000 naira. So there's going to be impact on transportation, on the cost of transportation, on the cost of transporting food items from perhaps the north to the south. And so this has a whole lot of impact on especially food inflation.
So what would you like the president to do over the next 48 hours?
So the first thing, again, we're already down this road. $800 million that is about to be borrowed or has been borrowed. It has to be channeled into providing immediate respite and succor to, Nigerians. They said, they want to share 5,000 to the most vulnerable, but I don't think that is sustainable. I think we had something close to a Shopee where, you wanted to provide buses and all that just to ease, but the impact would most likely be on transportation and the cost of food items. And so I don't think that these are things that can be fixed within 48 hours. These are things that I think can be fixed perhaps over a 3 month period. So it has to come up with an immediate plan of how this. But what President Bola Ahmed Tinubu actually promised in his Renewed Hope manifesto was a phased removal of fuel subsidy. But it's interesting. I like that.
Indeed.
Yeah, phased removal of fuel. So I think perhaps a phased removal of fuel subsidy would have provided an opportunity to then put in place some of these palliatives and also what has been described.
Sorry to interrupt you. You're still with us anyway, but we also have joining us Dr. Andrew Nevin, who's an economist. Also, he joins us now from Abuja. Dr. Nevin, thank you so much for joining us here on this special coverage of our new president, basically. So I'd just like to delve into the aspect of the foreign policy. The president made reference to what happened in Sudan and also said that he would work with ECOWAS, the AU, and specifically with willing partners in the international community. That suggests that the door is open for new collaborations, but I'd just like to know what you think about that aspect.
Well, there was a lot in His Excellency President Tinubu's speech today to digest. On the foreign policy aspect, I think he is saying exactly the right thing. The number one issue for Nigeria is of course the security issues around the Sahel region and the immediate neighbors and the role of ECOWAS. So I think it was the right emphasis. I have to say, from where I sit and meeting with a lot of the diplomats, particularly from the Western countries here, there's a huge amount of goodwill towards Nigeria and wanting to work with Nigeria. So I think that His Excellency will find that there's lots of allies in that. The United States sent a very strong delegation here. Secretary of HUD came, for example. I think the commander of the military in Africa came from the United States. So I think we're off to a very good start here, and I think his focus on the foreign policy issues, but also the economic issues, is really heading in the right direction.
Okay, so let's bring you back to what we were discussing before we brought you on air just a couple of minutes ago. On the issue of fuel subsidy, it's a big one. Like Seun has described it, he said it's the elephant in the room and it's something that has to be done. So please help us understand what will be, if you were to advise the new president of Nigeria, what will be the first few things he has to do to make sure that people don't suffer from panic buying, hoarding, and all kind of problems that will be the ripple effect of taking off the subsidy? What would you say that the president has to do immediately?
Well, to begin with, I think there's maybe some misconceptions about where the fuel subsidy goes. Very little of it goes to the bottom of the pyramid. The bottom of the pyramid don't own vehicles. the price for foil out in rural areas is much higher, in fact, above the mandated price on that. So I don't think it's necessarily going to have the impact that some commentators say. But in addition, of course, remember, diesel is unregulated, right? It's a market price for diesel, and this was done a number of years ago. And of course, most transport is supposed to happen by diesel. I mean, if you're transporting agricultural products in a car, that's a problem. It comes by truck. Trucks use diesel. So I don't think it's necessarily going to feed through into massive inflation increase. And of course, we've said before, last week I was with Rodas, and said, why do we have inflation in Nigeria, this very high 22%, 23% inflation? I mean, the reasons are entirely homegrown. One reason is because of insecurity, and insecurity is affecting all aspects of the economy, but it's particularly affecting the agricultural output, and farmers are planting less. They feel insecure. They're not able to go out to do what they need to do to produce food. So, I mean, the number one thing that His Excellency started out today with was around insecurity. So that message, and he understands, I think, very well that it's not just an issue around security, but it also flows through to the economy, as I said. The number two thing that's creating inflation here is, of course, the reduction in the hydrocarbon production, the reduction in the oil production. I mean, getting down to 1.0 million barrels a day is incredible on that. So that, again, that's entirely homegrown. I mean, when I arrived in this country, oil production was over 2. For many years, it was 1.7, 1.8. To allow it to decline to 1.0, perhaps about 1.2 million barrels a day, is creating real problems. So in terms of controlling inflation, I don't think the foil subsidy actually is going to have the removal of it is going to have a big impact. And of course, it also reduces the fiscal pressure because you don't have to borrow as much, which also reduces interest rates. So if we can get the insecurity situation or security situation addressed, as the president said he's going to do, and we can really focus on getting oil hydrocarbon production back up, I think it'll go a long way to mitigating any inflationary effects of removing the foil subsidy.
Dr. Nevin, I went online immediately. That breaking news came on saying fuel subsidy is gone. And there is a clear indication that a lot of people are going to go out and start buying. And that means starting from today, even if the prices don't change, the drivers of commuter buses will change their prices in anticipation of the fuel subsidy being taken off. Those who are selling rice that they've not even bought new one, they're going to start increasing their prices. So it will affect inflation. It will affect the cost of buying everything. It's going to affect practically everything because this is the way Nigeria operates.
Coyote, I disagree on this. I mean, people don't have storage facilities for foil, right? So there's a limited amount they can buy. Yes, they can fill up a few jerry cans on that, but people don't have their personal tank farms here. And, all over the world, foil prices move up and down all the time. People know there's an increased tax. They go and fill their tank up, but they're not able to fill it up for weeks and months in advance. So there may be a few weeks disruption at the very most, but I mean, it's not going to cause the widespread disruption, in my view, I think that you're contemplating on that. And there's no, as His Excellency said, there's no provision in the budget in the second half of 2023 for it. He's announced the foil subsidy is over. The economy will adjust to it, as it's adjusted to many things. I mean, I was around when we removed the diesel subsidy, and there wasn't really any sort of crisis with that. People, again, at that time predicted there was a crisis. It was relatively smooth. I expect it's going to be relatively smooth again in this time. These histrionics about what's going to happen with the removal of the foil subsidy, I think, are really misplaced.
Love your optimism. Go ahead. I love your optimism, but please go ahead and...
Great. Duly noted, Dr. Nevin, and thank you for your optimism as well. But we still have Seun here with us. And beyond what was, said about the fuel subsidy being a thing of the past, what was touched on in the aspect of the economy is the president stated that budgetary reform, I'm taking it verbatim here, budgetary reform stimulating the economy without engendering inflation will be instituted. What are your predictions on how this will be implemented?
No, I mean, I think that the president equally admitted that there's a need for a, clearinghouse effect, especially on the monetary policy. He's consistently criticized the monetary policy of this government, spoken out even when you had the Naira redesign policy. The monetary policy has not been working. We can see that in what you essentially can see in the result of inflation. Inflation is as high as 22%. It's perhaps one of the highest you've had since September 2005. So it's actually clear that no matter the improvement in terms of increase in salaries and wages, what's it called? The purchasing power will continue to be eroded by the level of inflation that you have. So it's quite clear about that. And you have had a situation in which, for a long time, waste and means has gone from about 12 trillion in 2015 to about close to 70 trillion now, well over 400% increase. So surely there's actually a need to actually fix our monetary policy. And he said that by saying that it's going to abolish the multiple exchange rate. But again, there's also the contention about revenue, where's the revenue to actually drive the budget and drive the kind of growth. He's talked about 6% growth rate. So where's the revenue that will drive that growth? In his renewed hope manifesto, which I reviewed, thoroughly, is from the plan that I see, is likely the ideology of the government is likely to be tilted towards playing the big brother role and wanting to actually fund what you talk infrastructure. Nigeria has an infrastructure deficit of well over $2 trillion and hoping to close that gap over the next 50 years by 2043. So what you have is that. So the big question would then be, where is the revenue to actually fund the kind of growth, the 6% growth that the president has talked about today? Where's the revenue going to come from? Is it also going to borrow? Because our debt is no longer sustainable. Although at 35% to GDP, some may argue that it is not be completely out of the roof. But my point is that it is going to be lazy for any government to just go and say, oh, we have a need here, and then go and borrow. Because it means, but then why were you elected to be president? Then it means you are not even doing the hard work. But we know President Bola Tinubu to be an ingenious man. He's done it with Lagos. When they had fiscal cliff here in Lagos, he was able to come up with creative ways to generate revenue for the state government, and that's why you see Lagos State is perhaps one of the most sustainable in terms of revenue today. You've had revenue reforms, and significantly Lagos is quite sustainable. So the big picture for the budget funding is then the question: where is the revenue going to come from? No matter the improvement that you may have recorded under the present administration with the land on land and rail, there is still a serious infrastructure gap. There's also required funding for human capital. It's not just fiscal capital. So where's the money going to come from? Also, although I also expected that he was going to touch a bit on his on what will happen to education, for example, tertiary education, for example, the ASU strike. I didn't quite see the president mention that, but that was also an area where, because again, that's also one of the most contentious things when you look at your line item in terms of revenue. We all actually agree, just like for subsidy, that also subsidizing education is no longer sustainable, especially at that level. So where's the revenue? By the time you actually free up subsidy from petrol, for example, it gives you a big fiscal airspace, right? But then there is still serious revenue demand for the government, and it's not just about going to print money like we've had under the last government, where you need money, just go and print, and then you bring a huge ways and means by the end of your tenure. But that's why you see debt has gone from about 12.6 trillion in 2015 to about 70 trillion, just in 8 years. So it's not just about going to print money. It's actually about sitting down to look at what we have and how we can ingeniously get ourselves out of this present monetary and fiscal quagmire.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I like the fact that you alluded to the issue of revenue. And that issue of revenue brings me to the harmonization of multiple tax ways of raising money, which he said that he is going to look at it. Exactly. How this multiple taxation will be dealt with and create an harmonization so that people are not taxed in so many ways. But we'll talk about that. I can't get away from the fuel subsidy. Right. I can't get away from it until at least we have a clear understanding. And for those of our viewers who are wondering, how is this going to work? Do you agree with Dr. Nevin that there's not much that can be done, that everything will be fine? Or you think Nigerians, knowing the way Nigerians are, that the prices of rice and bread and everything will go up from tonight, not even waiting for the next few days until when they get the new stock? Right.
So, I actually alluded, during the first round of question that I do think that there's going to be panic buying, and, you're likely to have a rise in the cost of food items. Definitely, there's no doubt about that. And I think I'm sure Dr. Nevin would equally agree. I may then agree with Dr. Nevin that there won't be crisis because, there's actually a national consensus that fuel subsidy has to go, even down to the people in the grassroots. We all agree with that. But then it's not just about removing subsidy. It's actually about having a a strategic plan over time that helps you to actually cushion the impact on the citizens. So now you asked a question earlier about what are the immediate measures, and the immediate measure for me would be that one, how do you cushion the effect on transportation? There's definitely going to be a surge in transportation, in the cost of transportation. I mean, there's no doubt about that. There's also going to be an increase in the cost of food items. So immediately the government has to see how they can immediately cushion the impact.
So let me take that back to Dr. Nevin then. Dr. Nevin, I understand, you work for PwC, you consult for local and international government, you deal with economies across the world, you understand macroeconomics, and so on and so forth. But in terms of when you relate it to just Nigeria, and you've been around for quite a bit, so you know our economy, the prices of goods will start to go up. What do you want to advise the government, this new government, what would you advise them to do to make sure that as the prices of goods go up, food will go up, everything will go up from tonight? And I can bet you with everything that by tomorrow morning you see changes in prices. Though the stock of petrol that people are using is not being affected immediately by fuel subsidy is off. But that's the way it happens in Nigeria. What would you advise government to do to make sure that the projection over the next 3 months does not get railroaded by just what happened today?
Well, as I said a little earlier, and I've said before with Rodas on the show and his show, the biggest impact, the reason for inflation in this country is because of the decline in the naira. When I arrived in this country, it was 128 or 160. I can't quite remember why. I was shocked when someone told me at one point the naira was worth more than the British pound. But we've gone from 160 to 750 or 760, and we import inflation. This is a highly open economy. There's a huge imports, there's huge exports. There's nothing wrong with that. Of course, we've got the remittances as one. We're exporting more services. We import all the things we know we need to import. Hopefully with the Dangote refinery, we will no longer need to import PMS very soon. But we're a highly open economy, and we're effectively creating inflation because we've allowed the exchange rate to decline. And what's driven that decline, as I said a little earlier in the show, the number one reason that's driven that decline is the reduction in hydrocarbon production. So if you want to get inflation down or prices stabilized, we need to get that hydrocarbon production up. And I'm absolutely sure that His Excellency President Tinubu's administration is going to focus on that. But also, think about what they've announced today. They've announced there's going to be a unified exchange rate. That's going to give a huge boost to confidence in this nation. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised to see if the parallel market starts to come in to, 750, 700. I don't want to make predictions on that.
Dr. Nevin,
but if it starts to come in, you're going to be taking...
If you don't mind me interjecting, we just want to quickly take this. Former President Muhammadu Buhari has arrived his country home in Katsina State. He was received on arrival by the Emir of Daura, Farouk Umar Farouk, and other traditional title holders from Daura Emirate and the neighboring Niger Republic. The former president worked his way home in the midst of cheering crowd of admirers.
Amin. Amin.
Okay, thank you very much. We're back. We can see how the people in Katsina are welcoming the former president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari. He's loved by his people, and they're really happy to see him come back in one piece as it is. So we come back to you, Dr. Nevin. Very quickly then, please finish what you were saying in terms of your analysis and explanation on what you will advise the new government to do. Thank you.
No, thanks. Thank you, Coyote. But I mean, what's driven inflation in this country, as I said, is we've had this declining exchange rate because of our various economic policies. I mean, His Excellency President Tinubu has come out today and made some major changes to those economic policies, and I think it's going to give a lot of confidence to people in the country and people around the world. And so if we could start to get the hydrocarbon production back up, and I know there's a big focus on that, and we could start to have confidence in the future of the economy, which I think we're going to have after this, what President Tinubu has started out on doing, you're not going to see a declining exchange rate. You're going to see a strengthening exchange rate. And of course, as soon as the exchange rate strengthens, then what you're going to see is a reduction in inflation, a stabilizing of prices. So that's what the administration should focus on that. But I mean, part of the issue, I think, is sometimes we don't focus on the fundamentals. Why are prices going up? And now people seem to have this idea prices will always go up. Well, they're going up because we have an exchange rate crisis. We have a balance of payments crisis. So let's fix those issues on that, and then we'll be able to stabilize it. And if we have better security, which brings down food inflation, and we have better hydrocarbon production, and we have more confidence in the economy coming from the removal of the foil subsidy, coming from the exchange rate regime, coming from other reforms that the President Tinubu has announced today, then I think we'll have a lot of confidence. I mean, remember, I lived in China for 10 years. I went there in 1983 the first time. I saw 30 years of economic transformation, growth 6, 8, 10%. I spent a lot of time in India seeing the same thing. This is the next biggest story on the planet in the economy. People are very interested in investing in Nigeria. Nigerians are interested in it, the diaspora is interested in it, and outsiders are interested in it. So it's not going to take much to light the spark and move in the right direction. And once the macro fundamentals improve, I think we'll be in a much better place. But because we've had such a difficult time, particularly with the exchange rate over the last 6 or 8 years, people expect it to continue to get worse. But actually, I'm very optimistic after today's announcements on that. And we just need to focus on those few fundamentals, and we're not going to have runaway inflation anymore.
Many thanks, Dr. Nevin. And of course, Seun, thank you for your time. Thank you for your analysis as well. We appreciate your time.